I had seen him strangling her, and I felt frozen, but I felt like I didn't save my mom.
I remember looking back at my mom and feeling like I had failed because I couldn't protect her. And so I'm in gym class, and I stumble upon this ancient, secret martial art.
I had the opportunity to do this amazing training
As a teenager? Okay.
Called Gung Fu.
It's her sister. She was just raped at knife point. She's in the hospital. And I realized I failed her. I failed her because I never shared with her how she should protect herself.
Okay, so why do I train? Hey.
Hey. All right. Welcome to Unbroken From the Ashes. And I'm James Ash.
And I'm Jessica Ash.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about why we train.
And doing hard things.
And do hard things. So as we jump into this, we put a post online about Q&A, like ask us anything, what do you want to know about us? And one of the questions was really good. It was saying something to the effect of, tell us about a famous role model or a known person that you look up to and follow, and perhaps who are some people that you read like for inspiration and guidance as to who we are.
You're asking me this question.
Yeah.
All right. So I think I have a variety of like authors and inspirational speakers. I tend to gravitate towards a lot of the male, like masculine thought leaders like Jocko,
Right.
and Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
I also have done a lot of research like the Gottman books about like why marriages succeed or fail.
That's a great one.
And so there's a number of like psychiatry thinkers that I've learned a lot from that have helped me evolve.
Yeah. Now, as we're talking about psychiatry and folks that have led the world in their thoughts, like Nietzsche and other folks, are there any specific thought leaders from history that stand out to you?
So there's dark sides to some of these.
Of course.
So you have to kind of decide how deep you want to get into it. But
Yeah.
Nietzsche has some really cool thoughts and some dark thoughts. Carl Jung.
Yep.
This kind of like this dark secret side that everyone has.
Absolutely.
I'm really fascinated by that. I think that's the majority of them.
Yeah. So for me, you named a few that really stand out to me in current thought leaders. Viktor Frankle, his book, Man's Search for Meaning, was very, very powerful. And as far as historically, I do a lot of reading of the Stoics, like Marcus Aurelius. A lesson I learned from somebody, but he told me once, one of the greatest things we can do is have detachment from outcome. We can find ourselves in a good place or a bad place, but be detached from the outcome. We're going to talk about training, and one of the things you've done in your training journey is you did that reality show.
I don't think that I could have taken any more than what we had at that exact point.
They were thinking that it was going to be easy. They had no idea that I had the gauntlet prepared for them.
At that moment, I was panicking inside.
There isn't no crying in real life.
It's just kind of hard balancing those emotions in the moment. Like in the moment, it's not constructive criticism and it's not coaching. To me, it's like you're picking on me.
Someone is really trying to hurt you, trying to end your life. There is no room for crying.
I'm afraid to fight somebody.
I'm not gonna let this person beat me.
And we're going to talk more about that. But when you got back, you didn't just say, okay, I accomplished a thing and I'm good. You were in the gym the next day.
Right.
I mean, it was rehab work and mobility work. But you didn't just rest on that. And like when I wrestled and I competed, if I had a win, the next day I still went to practice because I'm not resting on that win. I think that's really what he's talking about. It's like, don't let yourself get inflated by the wins.
Right. Or broken by the losses.
Exactly.
Right. All right.
I
So
like it.
we're going to talk about our training journeys.
Yeah.
So tell me a story about this kid who was getting beat up all the time.
Yeah, not my proudest of experiences. So this goes way, way back to, I told you about that first memory I had with my sister when my mom was getting thrown around the kitchen by my dad. And I was trying to protect my little sister under the dining room table. And, in retrospect, I remember looking back at my mom into the kitchen, looking at her, and feeling like I had failed because I couldn't protect her. My memory tells me I should be doing something about this without the idea that I was 3 years old. What would I be doing, right? But in my mind, I beat myself up for having not been able to do something about it. And so, and maybe that was the first spur that kind of led me down this path as we grew up. But as we grew up, my mom was the primary person that was constant in my life raising me. And I was getting beat up a lot in school. I was the kid that had fleas, we had lice, we had, dirty clothes, old clothes. We didn't have the new stuff. And, I was picked on a lot. I'd have kids like hack loogies into my hair on the school bus. And that was an all the time thing. And honestly, at that moment, I was just happy I was getting some kind of attention. And so I went home and told my mom about this. And I said, hey, I'm having these things happen to me. And her response was, the Bible says turn the other cheek. We're not supposed to fight back. We're just going to let God handle this. And, the best thing we can do is just turn the other cheek and let God take care of it.
Bet that was some stellar advice.
It did not help.
Really? I'm so surprised.
Strangely enough, it kind of made me more of a victim.
Really?
It was, wild.
Shocking.
Strange how that happens. Now, in her defense, she was deeply abused. And when she did fight back, it was twice as bad for her. So in a way, she was giving me some advice that she thought was helpful and some advice from the Bible that she thought was helpful. Very, very unhelpful. Good intentions, but ultimately terrible advice. So that went on until like 7th grade. And so I'm in gym class and I stumble upon this ancient, secret martial art, high school wrestling or collegiate wrestling. So I had a section in gym class where we went from like basketball or some kind of sports ball training. And then the next quarter we did wrestling. And that was my first time learning that I could stand up for myself and protect myself with like myself. I don't need a tool or something else like that. There was a time earlier in my life when one of the neighbor kids down the road chased my sister with like a 2x4 with nails hanging out of it. And I chased him down and I punched him in the face to try to protect my sister. And he didn't give her a problem after that. And this was like 3rd grade, maybe? 2nd, 3rd grade. So I learned I could stand up for other people, but I never learned that I could do that for myself. Now, wrestling gave me this kind of exposure to myself. Like, wow, I do have some strength. I do have some power, and I can do these things. Now, ultimately, it was very painful, and there was a lot of hard learning because our wrestling coaches were not great. And we learned the hard way just by getting beat down by each other and through competition with other high schools. But that's really where I started to find my confidence. I learned that I could stand up for myself, and it started a journey for me. So after wrestling and after high school, I joined the Marine Corps. And through boot camp, we had these very intense training opportunities, right? We learned the Marine Corps martial arts program, but we had all this other training too. And all of those very physical, very hard, challenging moments continued to give me a little bit more self-confidence and help me understand what I'm capable of. all the way through to boot camp, where I talked about the broken ankle and being able to fight through that. So all of those really hard training experiences made me understand myself better and understand what are my limits. And it's been a phenomenal experience. Now, as I went through the Marines, I became a Marine Corps martial arts program instructor. And I felt like I was giving a gift to my fellow Marines, that I was making them better warfighters. I was giving them something that would maybe perhaps one day help them if they were in one of these worst case dire situations in combat. I'm going to fast forward a long way. So I started teaching professionally for the Marine Corps in 2004, and I had been teaching nonstop since then. 2007 comes around, and I get recalled to go to Iraq. I go, I get my papers, do the thing, the training, airplane lands, we get to Al Taqaddum Air Base, and I have a phone call, and I call my mom. And I say, hey, Mom, I'm here. Everything's good. I made it. And she's like bawling her eyes out. I'm like, Mom, listen, I'm good. I'm with a good group of guys. Don't worry about me. I'm set. And she's like, no, I'm not worried about you. You're good. It's your sister. She was just raped at knife point. She's in the hospital. So here I am, big brother. I've taken it upon myself to be her protector from that day under the table all the way through, beating up the neighbor kid that was chasing her with a 2x4 with nails, all the way through high school. And here I am on the other side of the world, and I realize I failed her. I failed her because I never shared with her how she should protect herself. And it was kind of at that moment where I decided that I wanted to really pour my knowledge and skills and abilities into teaching other people how to protect themselves. And it was really at that moment that my driving force changed of why I train, instead of just like learning about me and my own limits and that kind of thing, but really wanting to help others to attain the same.
So you're deployed to Iraq, and you kind of have this life-altering change in your why,
Yeah.
in your drive in terms of sharing and teaching combatives. When you came back to the United States, did you change what you were doing?
Not right away. At that time, I was working 100 hours a week. I didn't really have the luxury of free time. Mm-hmm. I was, really 16 hours a day I was at work. But
So when did you start to have that opportunity?
I started, I really started that when I got to Pittsburgh, and so I got back from Iraq in 2008. So this was probably around 2009 or 2010. I started training with a local mixed martial arts club that they focused on teaching, combatives and self-defense and in various ways. A guy that was a state trooper and taught for the state police ran this little martial arts club, this combatives club. And I signed up because this is what I do. I want to make myself better. And it wasn't very long, and he asked me to start teaching. And I had this opportunity to start teaching these like-minded folks. And so I kind of started that journey there. Very quickly after that, I started working for the federal police department. And I got, I became a federal firearms instructor, the ground fighting instructor, officer survival instructor, non-lethal instructor. I got all of these different instructor certifications to help my fellow officers with the same mindset of teaching the Marine Corps, helping these guys who put themselves in harm's way to be better at it. But all of those skills also translated to teaching civilians. I found ways to translate those mindsets and those skills. And so, I started having little private clients here and there, doing little short YouTube videos that were terrible and I got made fun of for, but they were like little things like, hey, I see women walking around with these scarves on and how they were tied around their necks. And I was saying, this is actually a pretty big safety issue. So maybe consider doing something like this instead. So I would do these like little situational awareness videos or quick tips. And that was probably 2009.
Okay.
And so, and so really I've been on this journey since 2004 professionally as a as an instructor, but really this journey started a long, long time ago. And honestly, the why is because I have known too many people, myself included, who have been hurt too bad, and I want to give folks teeth and claws to fight back, like when violence is visited upon them, both as a professional of people who put themselves in harm's way, but also those of us that don't. So that's kind of my driving force, and there's a lot behind it. But I know you have stories and whatnot too. So
Yeah, I have
enough
stories.
about me.
Well,
Let's talk about you.
Before we talk about me, though, you have to explain why there's this thing hanging out of your neck.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
everyone, if anyone's watching the video of this, they're probably
We've
like
got-
getting close up. Like, what is that?
Yeah, so I'm gonna let the cat out of the bag. There's a lot of people that think I'm a cyborg, and I'm busted. This is where I get my oil changed and my transmission fluid changed, and where I get lubed up and whatnot. This is that's where it's at.
That's where that happens.
My maintenance dongle is hanging out. No, so this is we're back in Arkansas, and I am starting a stem cell transplant this week, and today I got that super mega dose of chemo.
The mustard gas derivative.
Yeah, so melphalan, you shared with me, is actually a derivative of mustard gas. And, they started experimenting with it in after World War...
Two.
Was it after two, or was it after World War One?
In World War One, there were some people who noticed that individuals and animals that were exposed to mustard gas, they had, if they survived that initially, they had like severe bone marrow suppression.
Right.
And that gave rise to later, around the time of World War II, research into what are the actual effects, what are toxic doses, and from what I read, there were some physician researchers who realized that, like mice models who were
Right.
exposed to these agents, if they gave them cancer, they would go into remission if they had like a lymphoma or some type of bone
Right.
marrow cancer. And so that later, after World War II, gave rise to, can this potentially be a treat at the right doses? Obviously, if we don't give you so much that it kills you, can we potentially do something for your cancer?
Right.
And so that kind of started that research. And obviously, it's not the same thing as being exposed to mustard gas, but it is a derivative of mustard gas.
And being a derivative of mustard gas doesn't make it safe. So tomorrow I get my stem cells. If I were to not get my stem cells, this would kill me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's
That's very clear. Hopefully the world does not end tonight.
Yeah.
That's,
We'll
knock
have
on
to
wood. I'm
delay
just,
it.
right. No apocalypse yet.
So you have, I think, a very incredible journey with training as well. And then at one point, our journeys merged, and we've done some really cool things together since then. But let's take it way back. Let's go back to the beginning.
Let's go back.
Tell me about you. Why do you train?
Okay, so why do I train? When I was a little girl, I had indicated there was a lot of domestic violence with my father and my mother. One of the most traumatic things that had happened was the time that I had seen him strangling her, and
Right.
I was frozen in the hallway, too terrified to move, and my little sister was hitting him with her pajamas.
Right.
And I felt frozen, and I had guilt for that for decades. I felt like I was a coward. I was 8 or 9 years old,
Right.
but I felt like I didn't save my mom.
I get that.
And so it did something to me. Also, when I was probably after the age of 10, I was in a lot of fights. It was just where I grew up. Everyone was in fights all the time. And I didn't do too bad until the boys started getting bigger than me
Right.
and stronger than me.
Yeah.
That kind of shifted things. But I think I talked on a different podcast about this thing that happened when I was in 7th grade. This girl was a bully, and she was bullying me, and she put some stuff on my face, and it was this whole story. But I go into the bathroom, and she's trying to actually like, get physical with me.
Right.
And for the first time with her, I was like, fine, let's do it. And we ended up locking up, and she was trying to like get this big haymaker, which totally exposed, her entire abdomen. And I just started like punching her in the gut, and she bent over, and then I'm, punching her on her back, and she fell on the ground, and I, got her in mount, and I'm punching her on the floor, and the lunch lady came in,
Scooped
big
you up.
giant lunch lady, and she grabs me and drags me out. And right then, they would segregate the girls from the boys. The boys were coming up from the cafeteria.
Oh, okay.
And so they're walking down the hallway as I'm being dragged out, a big mess fighting this lunch lady. And so then they're like, oh, there was this fight. And then it came out that who I was in the fight with.
Now, was this girl that you were fighting like renowned badass? Or?
Yes, yeah, she was a known bully. And now here's the interesting part of this. Her face had scabs all over it.
Like from something previous?
From something else. It was already there. And maybe she had some craziness at home. I don't know.
Yeah.
But she had, it looked like brush burns all over her face. And I think I may have broken open a scab or two. But I didn't do that to her. And but the rumors that came from this, everyone thought that I messed her face up like this.
Got it.
And we both got suspended. And I found out I had lunch with a guy I graduated from high school with
Recently.
like 5 years ago. And we're like talking about our old teachers and what it was like growing up in that neighborhood. And he says, I remember when you beat up such and such. And he's like, oh, it was crazy. You were like smashing her head off the toilet, sticking her face in the toilet and flushing it. And I'm just like, what? I didn't do any of this stuff.
Wild.
And but apparently, like, that's how bad the rumor was.
Yeah.
That he remembers it, decades later.
Wow.
And I actually didn't do any of that. It was very fast. I maybe broke open a few scabs on her face, and that was it. So it was really funny. But I got a little bit of a reputation from that, and so I didn't get in as many fights after that.
Sure.
Now,
for the record, we hear a lot of people that are averse to training saying something like, bro, when I just see red, you don't know what's going to happen. I just turn into an animal. Well, I want to hear your opinion on that. Having been in a lot of fights kind of untrained, let's say you had someone that had, some professional training or skill, and you're in one of these moments where, bro, I just see red.
right.
Well, first, did you ever have that? Or did you ever have like television?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I think if you're in a situation where maybe they don't happen to have weapons or friends that are going to jump in, that violence of action can work. It has worked for me.
Sure.
That can also get you killed.
Absolutely.
Because then you're not seeing what's really happening. You're not seeing them pulling a knife. You're not seeing their buddy coming up behind you. So, and you're not keeping your cool because obviously
Exactly.
you're having the adrenaline.
Yep.
So most of the fights I was in as a kid were in that realm. But I was fortunate in that I did not get jumped and they didn't have weapons. So to answer that question, it has a place.
Sure.
And really, I think that the lesson there is that violence of action is sometimes very powerful, and can, if you're against an untrained opponent, it actually can make them freeze up and give you an opportunity to succeed. But I would never rely on that.
And I'll say this to dovetail what you're saying. To me, violence of action is a technique. You can use it deliberately. You can hit that switch and be that hyper-aggressive animal, but still keep your cool and still keep your focus and your decision-making, but just behave very aggressively and very violently. So I think having the capacity for both is amazing.
Yeah, that's where it's at. So now I'm going back to being like the young teenager.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to do this amazing training
As a teenager?
as a teenager
Okay.
called Gung Fu, and and I was very good at katas and point sparring. It was very helpful to me for many other reasons.
Sure.
I believed that I was, this powerful person who had all these super techniques and can harness chi and all this stuff.
Did you guys do the one-touch knockouts, that kind of thing?
No.
Okay.
But you would aspire to that after you were doing it for 20 years, maybe.
Got it.
But we were never that good. No, I think that more than anything, it was a sport that was very good, for social development and just like the reason I put my kid into Taekwondo when he was 5. There's other reasons for it and the athleticism, but I don't think it actually helped me learn how to fight.
Yeah. I was going to say, I feel like wrestling gave me a foundation, but I also recognize that there's no punching or striking or knees, elbows, none of that of any kind. And it's simply controlling the other person. And there's no chokes, there's no submissions. It's just, can you pin them?
But what a great foundation.
It's a great foundation, but it's incomplete.
Right.
And so Gung Fu for you laid a foundation for some things. And what would you say that foundation was?
Oh, a lot of striking.
Yeah.
I did a lot of striking. So a lot of punching, a lot of kicking. I learned how to meditate.
Mm-hmm.
I learned how to do katas. Did I say that?
You did.
Which is
very helpful.
Which is like
in
dancing.
A real fight.
It's
right.
dancing. But I think
So that's carried over to our wedding.
right.
Yeah. So
Right.
we were able to dance, and it was because of your katas.
Well, yeah, that's right. I learned how to dance. That it didn't help me learn how to pick up a 215-pound man and carry him on my back, but I did that.
You did do that.
That was training later in life. So when it comes to martial arts, I did that for a number of years, and then once I graduated from college, I didn't do any of these things anymore. I was too busy with my career.
Yeah.
And then I got into the situation with my ex, and he's a big dude.
Yeah.
And that was a situation where I don't know that there was anything I could have done when he intended to hurt me,
Right.
short of some other mechanism of making it an uneven fight.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I had no weapons and he had no weapons, there was no way I was going to win that.
Yeah, you would need an unfair advantage.
Yeah. And in some of those experiences, they were reliving trauma from when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And really broke, for that time period, my sense of myself. And I became very mousy and lost a lot of self-assuredness. And it took a long time to heal and kind of get those things back. But later, I did decide to start training again. And, and that's actually where you and I met.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of a Krav Maga, like Combatives that I was learning. And, but there was the one thing I always avoided was ground fighting.
Right.
I had some significant PTSD.
No doubt.
At that time, I was having a hard time finding information about spousal or domestic violence related PTSD. There's lots of stuff on veterans.
Right.
Very little information about domestic violence. And so I had to come up with my own plans on how do I treat this.
And that was brilliant. I remember you walking us through that and drawing on the whiteboard how we're going to rewire, the neural pathways to instead of thinking about this, think about that, and create these different connections.
Right.
It was
right.
fascinating to me.
So I'll walk you through that in a minute. Before I get there, I want to kind of just very briefly talk about how the PTSD manifested.
Okay.
So the things that I went through when I was in the relationship, I don't think I had significant traumatic response at that time. And I did my escape that I talked about before.
Right.
And I went to a place where like FedEx couldn't find me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to the police station, they didn't believe that this street existed in their town. So it was pretty well hidden. And actually, at some point, a private investigator was hired, and my ex said that he had videos of me walking in and out of the house, so he knew where I was,
Mm-hmm.
and that all of a sudden I was like afraid to walk in front of windows. I started
You felt very vulnerable and
very,
exposed.
very vulnerable. And so I bought a security cameras and with a DVR.
Mm-hmm.
And that way I could at least understand what was happening with this private investigator. Like, were they lurking around outside my house? Like,
Right.
what's happening?
Yeah.
And 2 weeks after that, I was getting ready for work and I saw that the DVR was gone. My computer was gone. And I realized that my brother had robbed me. And this is when I knew that he was on like narcotic pills.
Yeah.
And I had suspicions that he was actually had gone a lot more hardcore. So I immediately confronted him. And
Right.
after a very intense interrogation, he finally admitted that, yes, he broke into my house, stole cash, realized after he left that there were cameras, broke back in
Wow.
and took the cameras, took the DVR and the computer because I didn't know where that footage was stored. It was my work computer. And so that was when we found out he was on heroin.
Yeah.
But regardless, that was when the effects of like that paranoia really like went sky high.
Yeah.
Like
I can definitely see that.
I had a hard time leaving my bedroom. Like I was afraid of everything and I couldn't explain it. I didn't understand why. Like I was afraid to go to work. I was just terrified of everything. And I was acting in really bizarre ways that are out of character of who I how I would normally behave. So anyway, that was really how the PTSD started.
Mm-hmm.
And then, over time it got less and less, and it would just kind of rear its ugly head when the right triggers were present.
Right.
So it was still functional, but certain things would happen. Like, I don't know, I had a mattress delivered and for some reason I was convinced I made these guys mad. And then I was hiding behind, I wouldn't walk in front of the windows because I thought they were going to come back.
Yeah.
It was like really bizarre things. And it took somebody else to say, what are you doing? Why are you like crouching on the floor under the window?
Wow.
And so this kind of persisted. And so going to training was part of what I had thought, okay, I need to do something so I could overcome this strange paranoia stuff. I couldn't find much about.
So you decided to lean into it.
Yes. And I did for like a year. And then I realized what I was avoiding was anything that was on the ground. And that's kind of going back to, when he had me in mount and he was slamming my head off the floor. Anytime I would start to learn any ground fighting stuff at all, I would have it would trigger me.
Right.
And so back to what you were talking about, I read about PTSD in veterans and I read about dose inoculation, dose exposure to something.
Sure.
And I remember on the whiteboard, I drew like the side profile of a brain and brainstem. And I was talking about how you're in the woods and you hear a stick break.
That's right.
You have to have an impulse that goes down to a synapse and many synapses that then tell you heard a sound. Mm-hmm. And then it tells you that you need to, change these muscle groups in your legs to turn your body around and turn your head so you could see with your eyes what it is that made that sound. Then you see that it's a bear. Then you have more synapses that tell you, we need to release all this adrenaline and we need to get these muscles going so you can run. And that's your survival technique. And because you now have survived this episode, your brain and your nervous system will make shortcuts. So the next time you're in the woods and you hear a stick break, there is no need for all these extra steps. You hear stick break and then the adrenaline, and it's flowing and you're running.
That's right.
Okay.
It becomes an immediate survival mechanism.
Right. And so that's like the foundation of PTSD, is now you have these triggers that are really just shortcuts to the adrenaline response. And when you get back into normal life, they don't need to be there anymore, but they are.
Right.
And that's kind of like where it all starts. And so the dose exposure therapy is to, very slowly in small doses, expose you to these triggers and show you that it's safe. And over time, you will start to overwrite those shortcuts and make new neural pathways that aren't this immediate, they don't go to this immediate adrenaline
It
response.
teaches you to slow it down and actually think about it again like you did originally.
Right, exactly. And so when it came to ground fighting, what I had proposed to you and a couple of the other guys at that school was, would you guys be willing to help me through this? And, once a week we'll do something. I'm laying on the mat and somebody is like kneeling next to me.
At first, when you first started this, if you laid down and I was just in that room with you, just standing, that was the edge of what you could tolerate. And then I was able to kneel on the mat, maybe a little bit closer to you. And, once a week we would do this. And eventually I was able to have like one knee down and my other leg up across you. Like, so I'm mounted on top of you, but there's no pressure on you. Like no contact. So I'm like hovering above you.
Right.
And then I actually took mount on you. And it was a months and months long process just to get you there.
Yeah. And, but I think I've come a really long way.
Absolutely.
And what I have found is that I've started jiu-jitsu multiple times, and I even got my one stripe.
Yeah.
But I seem to find excuses of, I get an injury and then there's like excuses why I don't go back.
Tyler has a thing.
Right.
Yeah.
There's I'm a mom, I got to do this. And really, I think a lot of it is I'm avoiding it.
Yeah. It's like me and painting walls. We're painting. I think I need to floss the dog today. That's what I'm doing.
Like, really, James? Maybe you just don't like painting.
Yeah. So you find yourself avoiding it.
I do. Even now, I do. I'll do a weekend-long class. I'll do a ShivWorks, Craig Douglas class all day long, which I got to tell you, I see so many people who are training in martial arts who are, for whatever reason, they're afraid to go to a ShivWorks class. And I think it's because they don't want to like get owned or like damage their ego. And that doesn't bother me.
Right.
I know I'm not going to win everything. And in those classes, no one wins everything.
Right.
You have to be okay with that.
It gives you what they call a very honest experience.
Right. And so we've done that multiple times, and I'm okay with that. But I think it's the ongoing training. I'll start to find excuses and I won't continue it. And this
That's
is
really
actually,
interesting.
this is something that I'm actively changing now, because with your diagnosis, you have challenged me to, at a minimum, do at least once a week with one of these, either Antifragile or jiu-jitsu class, because it will help you sleep better at night, knowing that I'm getting this training.
Yes.
And so that is my new goal, particularly when I'm not in Arkansas. That's going to be my new training goal.
I think that the pressure testing of skills is very hard for some people. I think people, they want to believe themselves as tigers, but they're just paper tigers, and they know it inside. The logo, the motto of that company that I was working at when we started training, when we started dating, their motto was live with confidence. I have found that actual, real confidence only comes from competence. And the only way you find yourself competent is if you test and you know, and you kind of find where you stack up against your peers or stack up against where you were before. And I really believe that everybody who does training that's not pressure tested, somewhere in the back of their mind, they're like, does this really work? What if this guy was big? Would this be a viable thing to do? And that was one of the things that I was trying to change at that company. And I was absolutely undermined and cut down multiple times. Even when I became the director of training, I was like, hey, these are my programs. I want to change them this way. And I got into a knockdown, drag-out fight with the owner. And I almost walked out that day.
I remember that.
It was terrible. But what you're doing...
He had said that the people who pay for this training, they need to feel good about it. So if you pressure test them, they won't feel like they're on top of the world.
Right.
Right.
And his answer to that was, you would go to this, all-day simulation course, and you've done this.
I have. I did well.
You did very well. For safety, we only used instructors as the role players.
Right.
And there's value in that. There's something to be said about that to a degree, right? But it also had this confirmation bias effect of, let's say you're the student and I'm the role player instructor. If you did technique XYZ, as an instructor, I was groomed to like, oh, she did the thing, so she wins. Mm-hmm. While I appreciate that they were in training, they come out of it with this false confidence, and it's not true competence. You are getting into weekly training now. Mm-hmm. This last weekend, we met up with one of my old friends, and he has a local school here in Arkansas. When you come down to visit, I challenge you to go to his school.
Okay.
Don't let this be an excuse. Oh, I'm not in Pittsburgh. I can't do that. Now, back in Pittsburgh, you mentioned a training called Antifragile. Mm-hmm. And Antifragile is run by one of our friends, Sean Lupka. And he is essentially a satellite school of the ShivWorks brand. And so once a week, they do ShivWorks style training at each of the schools. And I think it's a really good thing to get into if you're in that area.
It's kind of like ShivWorks on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, so broken down, not as intense as the actual clinics that Craig Douglas runs. Not as the simulations are not as intense. Now, I'll say this: the ShivWorks approach is something that I've adopted into the law enforcement curriculum, and we use that style, that approach, and a lot of those techniques. As I wrote the program for our department, it's primarily ShivWorks content. It's phenomenal. If people haven't gone to that, you need to.
Go.
Absolutely.
To stand up, get a gun out or something in between, solve that problem with the puncher before the knife gets plugged in. Show me thumbs up, boys. Fair play. Ready? Go! 1001, 1002, 1002.
So we talked about the why, kind of the path of training. And we talked mostly about combatives. We talked mostly about self-defense training. Now, when we met, we started doing a different kind of training.
Right.
Maybe also something that puts us into hardship and suffering to a degree.
All right, I'm going, which one are you talking about? Because we have several, right? Okay. That was when I was first learning firearms training.
Oh, that's true. And then there was an ownership battle of who's going to teach the hot girl in scrubs.
Right. That happened.
Yeah. So we had firearms training, and what else were you thinking?
Well, the other do hard things, I guess it's not actually any type of self-defense thing, but it was doing these adventurous backpacking,
That's what I'm talking about.
survival courses, wilderness survival, that type of thing. That for me started, it was right after I graduated college and I got my first job. And for the first time in my life, I had like a paycheck that was more than $100.
Right.
And I was interested in seeing the Grand Canyon. And this is back in like 90s dial-up modem. And so I like punching Grand Canyon and like wait.
It takes 9 minutes to load the
wait,
website.
loading. And, but I was reading about what you could do while you were there. And there were these trails. And I saw this trail description for the South Kaibab Trail. And this is a very steep 6.7 mile trail from the South Rim down to the Colorado River in the middle of the Grand Canyon. And in the trail description, it said this is a 6.7 mile of bone-jarring descent into the desert. Do not do unless you are blah, blah, blah. And I was like, whoa, I got to do that.
I love it.
And I was completely, ill-prepared for it. But I started to get prepared for it. And so that summer, you should never do it in summer. Me and my aunt, who's only 7 years older than me, we did a rim to river. We spent the night at the river and we came back to the rim the next day. So that was my first big hike.
So your first backpacking and hiking venture was into the Grand Canyon,
Yes.
a mile vertical descent
Yes.
down to the river.
Yep.
Where it's astronomically hotter.
About 130 degrees.
And then what was it? It's like 7 miles back up with a vertical mile.
The trail we took was 11.4.
Okay. So 11 and a half miles back.
Yes.
Another vertical mile back up.
Yes.
That was your first backpacking adventure.
Yes. In fact, during that descent, we encountered a dude who was a retired Army guy, and he looked really bad, so we stopped him. Turns out he had already passed out 3 times.
Wow.
He attempted this with his canteen of water.
A canteen?
A canteen of water.
That's bold.
And but he wasn't carrying a pack, and so he thought he'd be fine. But he was already, like I said, passing out.
Yeah.
And he ended up getting airlifted out because we luckily stopped him at a place where there was a dry creek bed where a helicopter was able to safely land.
Wow.
And so that day was so hot that 5 people were evacuated out.
Wow.
No one died, but
Yeah.
5 people almost died.
Yeah.
And so that was my first adventure.
Bold.
Now
I like it.
I've since done Grand Canyon hikes. I'm at 10 times.
I think
now.
you're at 10 now.
Yeah. And so actually I don't know the one I'm going to do with Tyler this summer if it's going to be 10 or 11. I think 11. So I've lost count. It's been that many times.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And so, but you and I, at that point, I had also done a bunch of other things. I did the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu, which was 4 days through the Andes. I did Kilimanjaro.
Mm-hmm.
So I had done a number of different large backpacking adventures, and you were preparing for Mount Rainier.
Yeah. So my experience with backpacking and hiking up to this point was simply in the Marine Corps, and honestly, in boot camp and combat training. That was it. That was like, we didn't do overnight rucks and things like that as a military police officer. That was only in the very early days of my training in 2001, 2002. So Mount Rainier was my first backpacking adventure.
Right. And I was shocked to find out, I just assumed that all military guys would have wilderness survival training. And then I realized I knew I had
a lot more than I did.
I knew more than you did.
Yep, very much.
That was a shock.
Yeah, that's not common knowledge that, and everyone thinks that, Marines are all amazing marksmen and super ninjas with their hands, and, they're not.
It depends on
It
what
depends
your
on what you
job
did.
is, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, my learning of this was, I was slowly acquiring what I thought was the good equipment and things I needed for this backpacking hike, because my experience was, all right, what you put in your backpack is an extra pair of heavy boots, 3 pairs of camis, and the camis are nylon and cotton.
Okay.
And you need 3 shirts and 3 socks, and you need like what I carried in boot camp. And so that was what my bug out bag looked like in the early days. It weighed like 90 pounds. Wow. Because I was like, oh, I also need 3 to 5 MREs. Like, and I put all of those big, heavy things in there.
But isn't there something great about the reason I loved this so much was I thought I can carry on my back
Yes.
everything that I need to survive, and I can walk, and I don't need someone to drive me there. I don't need, I can do it all and carry it on my back. And
I love it.
I felt so liberated by
Yes.
that. And that was what I fell in love with, was that sense of independence.
Yes.
And, but when you were preparing for Mount Rainier, you did start getting some new gear, which was
did.
like an Arc'teryx rain jacket,
Yep.
which then I had gear envy because I always bought cheaper rain jackets. And I'm like, you have an Arc'teryx? I don't have an Arc'teryx. So I had to go out and buy an Arc'teryx.
And I saw you had this really nice one-man tent, and I set up a tarp shelter, mostly because I wanted to try to impress you, I think.
I bought the one-man tent because at that point I had already dated various guys, and every time I dated a guy who liked this kind of stuff, they ended up being fucking crazy.
Yeah.
So, and if I dated a guy who wasn't crazy, they didn't like this stuff. I couldn't find.
Yeah.
Right. So the one-man tent was actually this big deal for me because it was me finally accepting I'm never going to have anyone to do this with.
And so I did the same thing. I bought myself a one-man tent.
Right.
Because I landed in the same spot. I wasn't going out looking and dating. I just knew that I wasn't going to have a partner to go hiking with.
Right.
So
now we have.
we each have 2 one-man tents that we don't use. We actually gave mine to Tyler.
Right.
That was pretty cool.
So, what is the lesson in these stories about pursuing combatives and doing hard things? What do you think is the lesson there?
I think there are many lessons. I think if I'm going to take a universal lesson, I'll say if there's something that makes you afraid or something that challenges you, lean into it, kind of like you did. The best way to work through those things so that they can't control you anymore is to lean into it and very carefully conquer it. Because when you do that, you take away its power. You take away its power to control you with fear, through the PTSD. You take away its power. The reason you did the Grand Canyon, you didn't say. It was because you were afraid of heights.
Yes. That's why I wanted to see it.
Right. So you did that even then. You leaned into the thing that you feared. And you did it in a safe way. It was controlled, right? You weren't going to randomly fall off a trail. When you leaned into the ground fighting dynamic, that PTSD trigger, it was controlled and safe, but you didn't avoid it. You did, but you eventually leaned into it, And when you do that, you take away its power.
Right.
And I'm finding that I'm trying to do that now with cold showers. I can get into a cold plunge, no problem. I can dip into the Colorado River. It's 40 degrees, no problem.
You're afraid of cold showers.
The cold showers freak me out because of.
But you have this history.
Yeah, so we went a year without hot water, and it was a situation that I didn't, with those old cold showers, I didn't deliberately place myself into that hardship. Now, when I went into the Colorado, when I do cold plunges, I'm deliberately putting myself into those hard situations, and I'm learning how to control it and manage it.
You're going to go get in a cold shower as soon as we're done here.
I am. So I think part of this lesson is when we deliberately place ourselves into those hard situations especially ones that we have trouble with, when we find hardships that we are not deliberately placing ourselves into, it gives us some mental fortitude in how to manage those things. So the second lesson is do hard things.
I like that.
Yeah.
I'll do hard things.
So I think it's time to wrap up the podcast, guys. So yeah, I think those are the lessons. What do you think?
No, I think you got it.
Very cool. So
Take the cold shower after.
yeah, good call. So in wrapping this up, do we have any challenging things coming up that we're planning on doing?
Oh, I don't know. Cancer,
I mean,
you know,
yeah, there's that.
transplant
Things that we're deliberately
tomorrow.
Things that we're deliberately doing to challenge ourselves.
So we had planned to do this backpacking trip through Zion for our 5th anniversary. We had to cancel that because of the chemo.
Right.
Very soon, we have permits to do an overnight in the Grand Canyon because Tyler, our
Right.
son, wants to do a rim to rim.
Right.
Like
So-
he's heard us talk about this.
So for those that don't know, a rim to rim is starting on, let's say, the south rim of the Grand Canyon, hiking down to the bottom, and then back up to the north rim.
Right. So
It's a marathon distance it's like a reverse mountain.
yes, it's about 24 miles altogether.
Yeah.
And you're going from about 8,000 feet down to 2,000 feet. So you're going into the desert, and it's like 130 degrees at the bottom.
Yeah.
And yeah,
So you're doing that with Tyler coming up.
I'm doing that with Tyler. And you
And-
were going to do it, but now you're not going to be able
not so
to.
much.
So that's a hard thing. And
You're going to start doing weekly training, I hear.
I heard that. Yeah, I am.
Good. That makes me happy.
And then once you're through this and in remission, we are going to start doing a lot of check boxes on some bucket lists. There's quite a few things, adventures we want to take. And so I'm already planning those out.
And I'm going to start training again too, because I miss it. So the takeaway this week, I want to challenge you guys to do some hard things, whether that's getting into jujitsu or going on a hike, or honestly just sitting down and being introspective and journaling and exploring your own mind. That can be one of the hardest things of all. And when you find those sticking points, lean into them, figure it out, and don't let fear control you. Make a battle plan, approach it safely, but lean into it and don't let it conquer you. So until next time, make today great.
Does that look okay there?
Yeah.
And this looks okay?
Oh, yeah. Oh, the hair. Yeah, it's good. How's mine? There?
It's perfect.
Perfect. Okay.